More about William Gibson, this time his second trilogy, generally known as the Bridge Trilogy. This consists of the books Virtual Light, Idoru, and All Tomorrow's Parties. This is all of these books came out in the 90s, and they concern a future that's much more close to that time than his previous trilogy. The Sprawl trilogy, the Neuromancer trilogy, generally got the impression was roughly 100 years in the future, and so you know society had or hadn't advanced and hadn't changed in reasonably profound ways. But with the Bridge trilogy, you get the feeling it's more like 15 years in the future. The science fictional elements are there, but they're much more played down, and they're much closer to the technology that we already have. Gibson, I think, famously is one who said the future's already here, it's just unevenly distributed. So if you can imagine next generation technology just, a little more widely prevalent, that's roughly the level you have in the Bridge trilogy. The element of the Bridge trilogy that is a little bit new is, whereas in the Sprawl trilogy and the Neuromancer trilogy, um, characters have this strong relationship with technology, and technology is often the driving force, the thing that's being quested after by the various parties, and the thing that tends to drive the plot itself. In the Bridge trilogy, that is not the case. Here, it's more like societal factors are the main thing being explored, which are, heavily influenced by technology, but not. Gibson's focus now is more on the people using the technology and the society that they are creating. It's much more observational about our present time and about what is happening to us. So media, for example, becomes very important in the Bridge trilogy, especially television. There are a couple of television production companies that are presented very, very possibly realistically, possibly just cynically, but like the impact of the power of television is a major, major thing. For example, I think it's in Virtual Light. One of the main characters there is a security officer, and he has a partner who was raised in a cult in Middle America that saw television as like the gateway for religious messages from the transcendent or the divine, and this guy doesn't really. This is actually, it's unusual, but it doesn't really make him It doesn't make it impossible for him to navigate society. It actually wasn't that bad a way for him to grow up and become a relatively normal citizen. He still has this he's fallen away from the cult directly, but he still sort of respects the general idea of it, and I think that's meant to imply that most of us behave that way, that we give far too much power and authority to these images and words that are flowing towards us constantly from TV. So each of the books has, the multiple point of view characters that Gibson's known for. They are the same sorts of relatively passive people who are engaged with the world primarily when they're doing that thing that sort of matters most to them. Like there's a character named Rydell, the security officer, who really is driven by the desire to protect and to help somebody. There's a bike messenger named Chevette, who takes great intrinsic joy in bicycling. Um, Remember, this is like the 90s, so like cycling culture was still a little more kind of edgy and cool and not as widely entered into the mainstream. And so the descriptions of how she feels when she's cycling and navigating through, those were still a little newer to literature and had not yet become sort of cliches. But that's one where she takes her kind of deepest joy. The first book revolves around that detachment from the messenger and the message. She's given this package to deliver as a bike messenger that's very important, and that is sort of the MacGuffin for the book, the thing that everyone's trying to figure out. And she sort of recognizes that it's important, but she's unable to access it because she's just there to take it from point A to point B. So this is more of Gibson's focus on how people are alienated in their work from the final result of their labor. They get something, they do whatever it is they're supposed to do to it, and they pass it on in the chain, in sort of the vast corporate chain. And when they discover, in little ways, what it is that what they're doing is, bad, they're often unable, they're usually unable on their own to figure out what to do about it. They tend to need hand-holding and help from people who are guides or in a better position to explain to them, like, what's going on and what the stakes are. So, when you're following these point of view characters in Gibson's books, it's kind of like they do react to things, but they're very chill most of the time. Like I said, either because they're traumatized or because they're untrusting, and they're very slow to develop curiosity, very careful with their curiosity. They're not incurious about what's going on, but they don't want to get lied to or fooled again. And they need the prodding of other people who are more invested. It would be interesting to know why that is, and why we don't have more point of view characters who are just invested. And I wonder if it's like the difficulty of presenting people who aren't in this alienated stage, who aren't in this, untrusting, guarded, passive state. And where do these people get their alternate source of value that allows them to react and to be critical and to disrupt these bad events that are going on and to attempt to improve them? Perhaps, it can be described, but actually living them, is that too difficult for people? That's a depressing thought. I would hope not. It's not. It is almost completely absent from his fiction. I'm bumming myself out here. Okay, back to the Bridge Trilogy. So, the power of television, alienation from labor, and the reason it's called the Bridge Trilogy is that they share many common themes and common characters, and they share a common location, which is at some point in this near future there was an earthquake, and the Golden Gate Bridge is still there, but is no longer safe for travel. You can't use it to connect two places. This becomes a really powerful image. It's now become like a shanty town, sort of a no man's land, like a free urban space that people have just kind of flocked to kind of do their own thing, and live in the remnants thereof. And it becomes a really powerful image for the inequality, which has just, about sucked America dry. This idea that the bridge, to some degree, it's very clear, especially in the first book, that the bridge represents the attempt, the no longer functional attempt to make communication between people at the top and people at the bottom. Chevette, the bike messenger, for example, at one point is talking to another bike messenger about the wealthy people that they sometimes do deliveries for, and the guy admits that really the only thing that he knows how to relate to those people about anymore is like sex and drugs. That's all that they share anymore. They like bodies, and they like doing drugs, and that's it. Otherwise, they might as well exist on separate worlds. And it's hard to deny the fundamental rightness of that observation. Not necessarily sex and drugs, although those probably are big parts of it, but just that there's no longer any way easily to communicate across those gaps. It can be done, I want to say, here and there, but when I think over what's happened to the U.S., if you think about the people at the tippity income top, they're too detached from the social realities around them, and they are increasingly unable to understand what's going on. This is what the bridge symbolizes. And I don't know if it's just foresight, but having it be the Golden Gate Bridge in the Bay Area, you know, with sort of Silicon Valley tech billionaires buying up everything and the high price of real estate, that was kind of prescient on Gibson's part. I don't think that was happening to quite the same degree in the 90s, although it was certainly on the way. It has continued unabated. So that's another thing, a major theme of these books is inequality. Inequality between the wealthy and their de facto servants, like these bike messenger and the security officer. And in the second book, Idoru, and if you just had to read one William Gibson book, Idoru, I think, would be a great choice, because I think it stands really well on its own, and is deeply relatable, especially for people for whom science fiction details and symbolism are not like their thing. Idoru has as a main element of the plot a young woman who sneaks away from her family to travel to Japan to try to investigate a rumor about a band that she's a huge fan of. It's one of the best ways of dealing with fandom in a novel I've ever read. And again, it's this gap between the fans who consume the product and the creators of the product, the musicians. She does get to meet them, and there is this kind of like, how do you actually relate across this gap, between the creator and the fan, that's explored really well. Another major theme, I know this is adding up, but he's a good novelist. He has lots of themes, and since his characters are pretty passive and observational, he has time to just sort of let them observe things and tie lots of things together in his fiction. So you're getting a lot of just little things they notice, little things that they connect together. One of the characters in the Bridge trilogy is sort of like what would be the right word? He's like a freelance existential urban studies guy. He's from Japan, and he just kind of wanders around cities looking for he knows not what, but like new relationships or new ways that people are using cities or being in cities. And he like takes photos and talks to people and is like sort of trying to see into the future of human life by noticing little things about cities, like graffiti or the style of clothes. He's trying to be a prophet, and prophecy, foretelling, is a huge theme in Gibson's work. The desire for it and the desire to control it. So, in the second book, in Idoru, for example, there is a really villainous television company represented by a particular TV executive who's essentially the antagonist, and she's also trying to get close to this band. And there is a freelance researcher who's, I believe, is called Laney, and again, one of these kind of passive, high-skilled people. One second.
Her shot went fine.
Laney he was a subject in an experiment to try to create people who could recognize patterns in the vast sea of data, and he's become a researcher. He's hired by this TV company to find connections that they would otherwise miss. And so, he can do this to some just unbelievable degree. He can look at like massive patterns of data and follow these more or less intuitive paths and make these discoveries which are very valuable to them. He's left the place, and they're unhappy about that, and he is unsure what to do with his talent, because again, he's not really directed. He's not really interdirected towards anything. He doesn't know how he does this. He doesn't feel proud or upset about it. He just kind of learns to live with it. But he does have that element of foresight, which it's implied is just so vital to exercise constantly. Now that we live in this gigantic, fast-moving corporate economy, you got to have those people or things or something that gives you accurate guidance, moment to moment to moment. This theme would become even more important in later Gibson. We'll talk about that. But at this point, it's still centered around this person, this sort of intuitive person who can give you guidance. So in the third book, Laney becomes one of the driving forces of events. He has like dug deep into the information of the world, and he looks for what they call nodes, where like central things are floating around these. He's become very mystical. It's almost like he's like an internet guru, and he reaches out to Rydell to help alter something. He can feel like he can see some great shape of the future emerging, and he wants to influence it, which is nice because often Gibson's characters never get to the point of actually developing a desire to influence the future, but Laney does. He wants to, and he's going to use Rydell as his instrument to that end, and it centers around the bridge and also this plan involving a antagonist that involves nanotechnology and artificial intelligence to produce some kind of sadistically controlled underclass of humanity. And it's pretty good. That one, All Tomorrow's Parties, is pretty fun, and it sets two groups in sort of against each other. One is that kind of very directly controlling, using advanced technology for sadistic ends, which is like the typical Gibson antagonist. Is they usually have a sadistic element, and against a much more bohemian, free-floating, artistic, I don't know exactly what I'm doing kind of group of people, but I'm acting a lot on faith. In this case, Rydell is acting on faith in Laney's ability to foresee the future. He does a lot of stuff just because Laney tells him to do. Laney can't even tell him why. It's too complicated or there's not enough time. And so then you get to this other element of Gibson's fiction. People doing things without knowing why or even really what they're doing. Which, I don't know, postmodern might not be the right word. Post-enlightenment. It usually was accepted that, in a rational universe with rational people, they would know what they were doing when they were doing it. Would they understand every little aspect of it? No. But Gibson is sort of like wrapping back around towards, we do what we do on behalf of trust and faith in something, in a person or a thing or a concept. Like there's a character in one of the books, he's some kind of master killer. He's like a master of violence of some sort, and he is a firm believer in the Tao. So he's like doing this killing in the name of like the way, and letting his actions just sort of be prompted by instinct and this idea that it fits into a wider harmony. In Neuromancer's first book, at one point a character gets help from a supporting character who believes in Rastafarianism, and his only answer for why he's helping this guy is, I don't know, Jah Love told me to do it. So it's funny. It's kind of like in the middle of these like high sci-fi concepts, a lot of what Gibson's fiction is about a rebirth of faith. Faith, not in God necessarily, of course, but in something beyond the normal, rational human mind. Normal. Normal. Sorry, this is silly concept, but like something beyond the sort of rational, technocratic human mind. Faith in some kind of value. It doesn't need to be a lot, and it usually isn't. But like Rydell, the security officer, has faith that protecting people is just what you're there to do. It's like a value, a virtue that he is willing to put himself on the line for. Chevette takes risks every time she goes out on her bike because she just loves the existential experience of cycling. Laney, it's never quite explained why he feels moved to act on what he sees, but presumably what he sees is a future so dangerous that it needs to be averted. He's anti-dystopian, shall we say, and so he's embraces his talent and he pushes it as far as he can in order to help make the right interventions that will prevent this darker future from coming to be. And this is, I don't know. I think it's kind of neat. There's something neat about this idea of within our kind of corporate technocratic mainstream civilization that it is these tiny little bursts of transcendent existential experience that provide an alternative to just following the profit maximizing sadistic path. They're just tiny. Uh, they're not usually world altering, although occasionally you get the feeling that something big happened. But at least it's an alternative for those people who are damaged or who can no longer keep the faith with the endless productivity quotas and the endless meetings and the endless consumption. The implication is there is still out there another world in a kind of small, vaguely accessible way. And now that I'm talking about this, I'm wondering why, in Gibson's world, the natural world is basically absent. Like, the primary source of non-human or at least non social value that people have used for millennia to critique their societies and to find alternate sources of value and worth in their lives is just not there. Uh, like, I don't know if that's something about him or his audience, but it's really just not there. I mean, people don't even have pets in his in his world. They want an alternative source of value, but they pretty much exclusively look among human societies. So they're looking for, love or someone to tell them what to do or some new way to do their work differently. But they never look to like the sea. They never look to like animals. They never look at a river and imagine being that river or knowing what that river knows or partaking in that river's life. I think there's something there to talk about. Maybe when we talk more about Gibson's other books. Generally speaking, though, the Bridge Trilogy is really good. I would say it's better than the Neuromancer Trilogy. Setting it closer to the present was great. He's a better writer just in terms of like balancing descriptive passages against dramatic passages. There's some cool action. All of his books usually have at least a couple cool moments of conflict. The antagonists are much more familiar, and because of that, much more powerful. And the observations about technology and how cities work and social inequalities. I mean, it's like 20, 30 years later, and he was right. All these trends only accelerated vastly. So do check them out. And next time we'll talk about his third trilogy, which I think is sometimes called the Blue Ant Trilogy because it's the name of a company that's like a major plot element in the stories. These continue to be interesting and fascinating. I'm talking about Gibson at this length because his work has been such an interesting mirror to basically my entire life, so the last 40 years, and it's really cool to watch an author continue to grow and bring in new elements and share things that they've noticed with you. So yeah, next time the Blue Ant Trilogy. That'll be it.